Today's witness is called Joseph. He is a tall, rather bony man, clean-shaven, rather long face with vigorous grey hair and eyebrows. Steady, grey eyes of some kindness. A feeling, however, of great strength and firmness. A deep voice, no hand gestures at all. He will witness of tax collecting and of a party with unwelcome guests and of a great sermon. Joseph. It is now about 10 years since Jesus died on the cross. So many things have changed. I'm glad that Pontius Pilate has gone. He was a cruel man who did not really like his job or do it particularly well. People sometimes ask me why I didn't go back to tax collecting after Jesus died. Well, there are a number of reasons, but one of them certainly was that I was happy to have no more dealings with Pilate and his tax department. Mighty Rome took heavy toll. It charged its subject nations high prices for being subject, and ruled and occupied. The system they had once used was simple and direct, and open to much abuse. They would say, for such a district, so much, and would sell to the highest bidder the collecting rights. As long as they got what they wanted, they would ask no questions about how much the collector had made for himself. Rome knew very well how greed can corrupt. Over the years, the system has changed, but the people's ignorance of how much they had to pay did not. Rome and the government made few announcements, only demands, and the tax collector, extortioner turned civil servant, was the most hated man in the land. We were feared and despised. We were welcome nowhere. We mixed with our own. We could not act on a jury or be a witness or be part of a congregation. We were sinners. We were called vultures and bloodsuckers and outcasts. But the job had to be done. I worked for 3 collectors. The last one was Levi, or Matthew as he was known. He was an honest man. In that profession, a rare thing. He was rich, but you had to be. The treasury in Rome would not wait, but you might have to. Often the tax was a percentage of a man's crop. It could be wine, or oil, or wool, or skins. So many taxes: income tax, on certain articles a purchase tax, a vehicle tax. There were road tolls and harbour dues, and the markets were taxed. There were import and export duties. People paid us unwillingly, as always. They lied and made excuses. They were tense and strained with us, unnatural, full of hate. So you see, my friend, when Jesus came and stood in front of Matthew, quite relaxed, quite natural, steady-eyed, quiet, it stays in the mind. Matthew was not in a good mood. It had been a bad day. Name, he said, district, address, goods or money, occupation. Jesus said nothing, and Matthew looked up. He recognized the carpenter, so did I. We had been twice to hear him speak. He was well known as a healer. People believed him to be a miracle worker, not us. Tax collectors as a class don't believe in miracles. We are shown the worst side of people and come to believe it to be the only side. We learn cynicism early. Matthew and Jesus looked at each other without speaking. Then Matthew got up. They were much the same in height, although Matthew was broader, older, much more richly dressed. A strong man, well-educated, powerful, realistic, hard-headed. He stood still, his eyes as steady as the carpenter's. He seemed to be waiting. That morning he and I had been talking of how the sons of Zebedee, James and John, have given up their trade to join Jesus. We knew them. The story was that Jesus had just said, "Follow me," and they did, without question. I waited, like Matthew. Then Jesus made a little gesture that seemed to say, "This is a life for a man? This is to be rich?" Then he spoke. "Follow me," he said. And Matthew did. He walked away from his tax-gathering table and never went back to it. No doubt, no hesitation, no looking back. I don't mean that he just got up and left his desk and his office and his staff just like that. He was a senior civil servant, an efficient man, and hard. He had to be. His mind was made up, and it seemed that in no time he arranged everything. Even a replacement for me, for I wanted to follow too. If Jesus made sense to Matthew, that was good enough for me. In a way, Matthew and I were close. He talked to me. I knew him well. I thought very well. But in the few days following his decision to give up his job, a new sort of Matthew emerged. Very calm, but very cheerful. "I'm going to give a big party," he said. "A sort of farewell party, or a start a new life party." I pointed out as gently as I could that as tax collectors we were outcasts, pariahs, and we had no friends. No one would come to that party. "Pariahs will come," said Matthew. "Outcasts, taxmen like us, excisemen, customs men, duty collectors. A gathering of the hated, the feared, and the unpopular." He roared with glee. "And their wives and children." Then he was quiet. "The party will be for Jesus," he said. "Guest of honour, if he'll come." Of course he came, and with him came his first followers. My new workmates, Matthew called them. The 4 fishermen, Simon Peter and his brother Andrew, and John and James, sons of Zebedee. Philip came, and Bartholomew. They were all very different as people. And Matthew was different again. I had the feeling that Jesus, village carpenter, chose very carefully. It was a huge party. Wonderful food and drink, and music and songs. Jesus and his friends mixed easily and joined in everything. Jesus was very well known, a famous healer, a magnetic speaker. I was interested to see that at close quarters, in a noisy, crowded party, he had this same attraction. He spoke quietly, but you always heard. People listened. He spoke simply. You understood. If you spoke to him, he gave you his full attention. You were important. During that evening, fairly late, when the party was at its height, a group of Pharisees and scribes turned up. These lovers of orthodoxy, these experts in the laws of Moses, were the carpenter's bitterest critics. They disapproved of him entirely. They came in, wouldn't sit down, wouldn't eat or drink, just criticised and were unpleasant. People were embarrassed and grew silent. Eventually everyone was listening as they made their remarks, and Jesus replied. He didn't get cross. He answered them with little comparisons and parables. He didn't call them inflexible or shut-minded or stiff or resistant to new ideas. He spoke gently of new wine that needs time to mature, of old garments too great to be patched. And when they compared his followers with the fasting and praying disciples of John the Baptist and their own sects, Jesus paused. He was very quiet. He answered a little sadly. We did not know it was a prophecy. They are friends of a bridegroom, he said. Should they not share the feast and joy of the wedding? But the day will come when their friend, the bridegroom, will be gone. Then they will fast and pray. Matthew looked absolutely desolate. Peter too. I will never forget it. How well I recall that time. It seemed to me that the change in my life sharpened all my senses, and to make the change it seemed logical and easy. Yet to be a follower of something or something was not really my nature. My brother was the devout, the believing one of the family. He joined the baptizer, John, when he first appeared. We called him the disciple, my brother. I was the worldly one, the tax man with the good job in Matthew's office. Yet suddenly here was I, also a disciple, listening, being made to think in a new way, a more simple way, belonging. I was happy and stimulated and proud. Maybe proud in the wrong way, for when the day came that Jesus chose his 12, whom he called apostles, I was not among them, and I was hurt, for I joined when Matthew did. I remember the occasion very well. There was a great crowd of us disciples, and surrounding us an even greater crowd of people of every kind. Many of them from far, far away, from all over Judea, from as far north as Tyre and Sidon. Many ill people, many cripples, many blind. We were waiting for Jesus, tens of thousands of us, on the lower slope of a mountain and on the plain below. Most of us had waited all night, waiting for Jesus to come down from the top of the mountain where he had gone to pray by himself, to be with God. We never disturbed him at these times. We waited. We waited, and we were quiet. It was cold, as always, before dawn. The huge crowd were quiet too. A sense of something going to happen. Then the sky lightened, and as the sun rose and lit the top of the mountain, we saw Jesus. He came down slowly, thoughtfully, and the sun was on him all the way down. He joined us, and we crowded around. He greeted us with the easy friendliness that was very much his own, and then began to speak to us, his disciples, not to the waiting crowds below on the lower levels of the slope. He said that there were to be 12, what he called apostles. Matthew told me it was from a Greek word meaning someone who was sent out, an envoy, an ambassador. Then Jesus named the 12, and many, like me, were disappointed, though we all felt that Jesus, who knew men, had chosen the best. The last one named was Judas Iscariot, and as Jesus named him, he looked at him with a sort of sadness. He probably knew what Judas would one day do to him. Soddly. Odd. I've only just remembered that sad look. Then the Master walked on down the slope, and we all followed. The sun was now fully up, and it was warmer. The great crowd surged forward, bringing, as always, the sick and maimed to the front. For at that time the whole of Israel was talking about the cures and the healing done by Jesus. And that day he gave off this power like heat. You could feel it. Then he gave his great sermon, which people now call the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew was hypnotized by it. We all were. It seemed to turn every belief and law upside down and make even more sense than before. Matthew could quote the sermon word for word and used it later in his own ministry. It was full of hope for the poor, the hungry, the sad, the outsiders, full of love. Matthew, as I told you, was a rich and sophisticated man, and before Jesus called him a hard, cynical man. But not long after that sermon, I met him when he returned from one of his first trips as an apostle, and he was completely changed. Even his clothes. He looked like a poor preacher. He carried nothing, no staff, no purse of money, no food or water, nothing. As Jesus told us, he said to me, he also told us that we would be able to heal the sick. Matthew looked at me and smiled a new, more gentle smile. And I can, he said.